Picture this. You're floating in the vast emptiness of space, your ship's falling apart piece by piece, and you're about to become cosmic dust scattered across the galaxy. That's exactly where Captain Veltar found herself when everything went sideways in the Kepler 442 system. Now, let me paint you the full picture here. Captain Veltar wasn't your typical space explorer. She belonged to a species called the Zephyrians. Think six-armed, delicate beings who'd rather spend their time studying flowers and fighting wars. Their entire civilization was built around preservation and research. These folks were so peaceful that their military consisted mainly of really stern librarians. The gentle current was their pride and joy, a research vessel designed for one thing: keeping precious specimens safe during long journeys across the galaxy. This particular mission was huge for them. 3 species back on their homeworld were dying out, and these genetic samples in their cargo bay represented the last hope for bringing them back. We're talking about creatures that had existed for millions of years, now down to their final genetic codes, stored in specialized containers that needed perfect conditions to survive. Veltar had hand-picked her crew of 12 for this mission. They'd been traveling for months, carefully monitoring every temperature fluctuation, every power reading, treating those sample containers like they were carrying newborn babies. And honestly, in a way, they were. The future of 3 entire species rested in those little tubes. Everything was going perfectly until they hit the Kepler 442 system. Now, this wasn't supposed to be a dangerous area. Their charts showed it as a quiet region with some scattered asteroids, nothing experienced crew couldn't handle. But here's the thing about space. It doesn't care about your charts or your careful planning. What they found wasn't a few scattered rocks. It was like someone had taken a planet and put it in a cosmic blender. Thousands of asteroids, some the size of skyscrapers, others bigger than entire cities, all spinning and crashing into each other in a chaotic dance that would make your head spin just watching it. Their navigation officer, a nervous fellow named Kixtal, started sweating through all 6 of his armpits when they realized their planned route was completely blocked. But Veltar was confident. The gentle current had the best shielding technology the Zephyrians could build. They'd go slow, pick their way through carefully, and be on the other side in a few hours. That confidence lasted exactly 47 minutes. The first impact wasn't even that bad, just a chunk of rock about the size of a car that their shield should have easily deflected. But this wasn't ordinary rock. This stuff was dense, probably the core material from whatever planet used to exist here. It hit their port shield generator like a sledgehammer hitting glass. Then the cascade started. With their shields weakened, the next impact did real damage. Hull plates started peeling away. Their navigation system started throwing error messages faster than they could read them. The artificial gravity began flickering on and off, sending equipment floating around the ship like deadly confetti. But the real panic started when Kixtal announced that their life support was failing. Not slowly failing, rapidly failing. They had maybe 6 hours of breathable air left, and that was if they were lucky. The heating system was shot, so they were going to freeze long before they suffocated. And those precious genetic samples? They needed specific temperature and atmospheric conditions to survive. The containers were designed to maintain those conditions for about 8 hours without ship power. After that, millions of years of evolution would turn into expensive space soup. Veltar looked around at her crew, 12 brilliant scientists who'd never faced anything more dangerous than a paper cut in their entire lives, and realized they were completely out of their depth. They were researchers, not heroes. They studied problems. They didn't fight their way out of death traps. So she did the only thing she could think of. She stumbled over to the communications console, her 6 arms shaking as she activated their emergency beacon. The message she broadcast was simple and desperate. This is a Zephyrian research vessel gentle current. We are peaceful explorers in critical need of assistance. Our coordinates are attached. Any spacefaring civilization, please respond. We have scientific materials of extreme importance aboard. What she didn't mention in that message was just how important those samples were. She didn't explain that 3 species were depending on them. She didn't describe the asteroid field that was slowly tearing their ship apart. And she definitely didn't expect that the first response would come from a species she'd never heard of one that came from the kind of world that wasn't supposed to be able to support intelligent life. But sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. And sometimes, when you're least expecting it, help comes from most unlikely places. 3 days. That's how long Captain Veltar and her crew floated in that asteroid field, watching their ship slowly die around them. 3 days of checking their emergency beacon every few minutes, hoping someone, anyone, would pick up their signal and come to help. You have to understand what those 3 days were like for these peaceful researchers. Every few hours, another chunk of space rock would slam into their hull. Each impact sent vibrations through the entire ship that sounded like the universe was trying to crack them open like a nut. The temperature kept dropping, and they'd started rationing their remaining power just to keep the genetic samples from freezing. Veltar barely slept during those 3 days. She'd walk through the ship, checking on her crew, watching them huddle together for warmth, seeing the fear in their eyes. These were brilliant minds, scientists who could splice genes and map star systems, but none of them knew how to fix a dying spaceship in the middle of a cosmic shooting gallery. By day 3, they'd stopped talking about rescue. The conversation had shifted to whether they should record final messages for their families back home. Kixtal, their navigation officer, had already started writing his goodbye letter to his 12 children. The mood was getting pretty dark. Then, on the 3rd day, right when Veltar was starting to accept that they might not make a home, their proximity alarm started screaming. Something big was coming out of faster-than-light travel, and it was coming fast. Veltar rushed to the sensor station, expecting to see a Zephyrian rescue ship or maybe one of the other peaceful species they knew from the galactic community. Instead, what appeared on their screens made her 6 hearts skip several beats. This wasn't like any ship in their databases. The thing was massive, easily 3 times the size of their research vessel, and it looked absolutely terrifying. Where Zephyrian ships were smooth and curved, designed to look welcoming and peaceful, this monster was all sharp angles and aggressive lines. It had weapon ports that looked like they could punch holes through small moons. The hull was this dark, intimidating color that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. If you took a shark and made it into a spaceship, this is what you'd get. But here's the really weird part. It wasn't attacking. Instead, their communication system crackled to life with a voice they'd never heard before. The language was rough, with hard consonants that their translation system struggled with. "This is the human vessel Relentless. We received your distress call. We're here to help. Transmitting boarding protocols now." Humans. Veltar had never heard that word before in her life. She frantically started searching their galactic database while her communications officer tried to respond. What she found made her blood turn to ice water. According to their records, humans came from a planet called Earth, officially classified as a classic Psi death world. Now, to put that in perspective, the Zephyrian homeworld was classified as Class I, which meant it was basically a paradise where the biggest danger was maybe getting a splinter from a particularly aggressive flower. Class X Psi was the absolute worst rating possible. These were worlds where everything was actively trying to kill you at every moment. The database entry for Earth read like a horror story. Gravity so strong, it would crush most species flat. An atmosphere so corrosive that it would burn through standard environmental suits. Weather patterns that could level entire cities. Predatory animals that made the scariest creatures from Zephyrian mythology look like cute pets. And somehow, impossibly, intelligent life had not just survived on this nightmare world, it had thrived. Veltar kept reading, her eyes getting wider with each entry. These humans had evolved from hunters. They were persistence predators, which meant they would chase their prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies were designed to function in conditions that would kill her crew in minutes. They could survive temperature ranges that span hundreds of degrees. They could go days without food or water. And now one of their warships was parked right next to her dying research vessel. Her first thought was that this had to be some kind of translation error. Maybe human was just a mistranslation for one of the peaceful species they already knew. Maybe their computers had gotten confused because of all the damage to their systems. But as the Relentless maneuvered closer, its massive bulk blocking out the stars, Veltar realized there was no mistake. The The ship moved with a predatory grace that no peaceful species would design into their vessels. Every line, every curve, every weapon mount screamed one message. We are dangerous, and we know how to use that danger. The question that kept running through her mind was simple and terrifying. What did creatures from a death world want with a ship full of peaceful researchers and genetic samples? Were they about to be rescued, or had they just attracted the attention of the galaxy's most dangerous predators? As the human ship extended what looked like a docking tube toward their vessel, Veltar was about to find out. The docking process itself was terrifying enough. Veltar watched through the porthole as his massive mechanical arm extended from a human ship, moving with a precision that seemed impossible for something so large. When it clamped onto their hull, the whole ship shuddered, and she was sure they were about to be torn apart. But then came the real shock. The airlock cycled, and Veltar gathered her crew to meet their rescuers. She prepared a formal greeting in Galactic Standard, the kind of polite, respectful first contact protocol that every civilized species followed. She expected to see beings in environmental suits, maybe with translation devices, definitely following proper safety procedures. What stepped through that airlock made her question everything she thought she knew about intelligent life. The first human through was tall, impossibly tall. Where Zephyrians barely reached 4 feet in height, this creature towered over them at nearly 6 feet. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was that it was walking on just 2 legs. 2 legs. Veltar species needed 6 limbs just to maintain proper balance. And here was this creature casually strolling around on half that number like it was the most natural thing in the universe. And they weren't wearing environmental suits. Let me repeat that because it's important. These beings had just stepped onto a damaged alien spacecraft, breathing contaminated air that was slowly killing the original crew, and it looked like they were taking a pleasant stroll through a park. The lead human stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice was deeper than any sound Veltar had ever heard from an intelligent being. "I'm Commander Jake Morrison," he said, and even through the translation device, you could hear this underlying strength in his voice. "We're here to get you folks out of this mess." Now, Veltar had been expecting some kind of formal diplomatic exchange. Most first contact situations involved lengthy protocols, careful cultural exchanges, maybe some gift-giving ceremonies. Instead, this human just started walking around their ship like he owned the place, pointing at different systems and barking orders to his team. And his team, that was another shock entirely. There were 6 humans total, and they moved through the damaged ship with this casual confidence that made Veltar's stomach turn. They weren't carefully testing the air quality or scanning for hazardous materials. They were just breathing normally, touching surfaces with their bare hands, acting like a slowly dying spacecraft was their natural habitat. One of them, a female human with short red hair, started examining their life support systems. She took one look at the damage and said something in their native language that made the others laugh. Actually laugh. Here they were, on a ship that was barely keeping its crew alive, and these creatures were finding something amusing. But what really got to Veltar was watching them work. Zephyrians approached problems methodically, with committees and careful analysis and multiple backup plans. These humans just started fixing things. The red-haired one pulled out some kind of tool and began welding hull plates back together, while another human crawled into their air recycling system and started hitting things with what looked like a metal club. And it was working. Systems that Veltar's crew had given up on were suddenly coming back online. That's when Commander Morrison asked about their mission, and Veltar explained about the genetic samples. When she mentioned they had maybe 6 hours before the samples degraded beyond recovery, she expected the humans to start discussing evacuation procedures or calling for specialized rescue equipment. Instead, Morrison just nodded and said, "That's tight, but doable." Doable? They were trapped in an asteroid field that had already nearly destroyed their ship, with a ticking clock on samples that represented the future of 3 species. And this human thought it was doable? Morrison started asking technical questions about the sample containers, what kind of environmental controls they needed, how much they weighed, how fragile they were. His questions were sharp and practical, like he was already formulating some kind of plan. Meanwhile, his team kept working on their ship with this terrifying efficiency. The red-haired human had somehow restored their main power coupling, something Veltar's chief engineer had declared impossible. Another human was in their navigation system, apparently fixing damage that their best technicians couldn't even diagnose. But the most unsettling thing was how calm they all seemed. Every few minutes, another asteroid would slam into their hull, sending vibrations through the entire ship. Veltar and her crew would flinch and grab onto whatever was closest. The humans wouldn't even look up from their work. It was like they'd done this kind of thing 1,000 times before. Morrison finished his examination of the sample containers and turned to Veltar with what she would later learn was called a smile on a human face, showing that many teeth should have been threatening. Instead, it was somehow reassuring. "Here's what we're going to do," he said, and the confidence in his voice made even her crew stop their nervous chittering to listen. "My people are going to get your life support stable and your engines running. Then we're getting everyone and everything out of this rock pile." When Veltar asked how they planned to navigate through an asteroid field that had already crippled their ship, Morrison's smile got wider. "The fun way," he said. Now, when Commander Morrison announced his plan, Veltar thought there had been some kind of translation error. She asked him to repeat it, thinking maybe her universal translator had glitched from all the ship damage. "We're going to fly individual fighters through the asteroid field," Morrison said again, speaking slowly like he was explaining something to a child. "Multiple trips. We'll evacuate your crew first, then come back for the genetic samples." Veltar stared at him. Her crew stared at him. Even their ship's computer seemed to pause for a moment, as if it couldn't process what it had just heard. "Commander," Veltar said carefully, "perhaps you don't understand the situation. This asteroid field is actively destroying our ship. We have computer-guided navigation systems, reinforced hull plating and deflector shields, and we still got torn apart trying to cross it." Morrison nodded. "Yeah, I saw the damage reports. Pretty rough out there. And you want to fly through it in small fighters? That's the plan. Without shields. Our fighters are built for speed and maneuverability, not heavy shielding." Veltar felt all 6 of her heart skip a beat. "Commander, with respect, that's not a rescue plan. That's suicide." And that's when Morrison did something that Veltar still has nightmares about. He smiled. Not just a polite diplomatic smile, but this wide, tooth-filled grin that showed way too much confidence for someone discussing what was clearly an impossible mission. But it wasn't just Morrison. His entire team had turned to look at their captain, and they were all wearing the same expression. The red-haired human actually laughed, a sound that sent chills down Veltar's spine. "Boss," the red-haired human said, "remember that run to the Titan debris field last year?" "Different situation, Kelly," Morrison replied. "That was just random chunks of moon. This is an active collision zone." Kelly's grin got even wider. "So more fun, then." Veltar realized she was witnessing something that no peaceful species would ever understand. These humans weren't just confident about their insane plan. They were excited about it. They were actually looking forward to flying tiny ships through a cosmic meat grinder at speeds that would liquefy most species. Morrison turned to his team. Standard evacuation pattern. "Kelly, you take the first group of civilians. Rodriguez, you're on sample transport. Those containers look delicate. Thompson, you're covering approach vectors. I'll handle the rest." Wait. Veltar interrupted, her voice climbing higher with each word. "You're talking about this like it's a routine training exercise. Commander, our computers calculate the probability of successfully navigating this asteroid field at less than 2%. Good thing we don't rely on computers for flying," Morrison said. And that's when Veltar learned something terrifying about humans. They don't just use their technology. They are their technology. While every other species in the galaxy had developed advanced computer systems to handle the complex calculations needed for space navigation, humans had developed something else entirely. They developed instincts. Within 30 minutes, the humans had their fighters deployed. Veltar watched through her damaged viewports as these sleek, deadly-looking craft emerged from the belly of the Relentless. They were smaller than she'd expected, barely larger than the escape pods on her research vessel. But they moved with a predatory grace that made her understand why humans had dominated their homeworld. The first test run, nearly gave her a complete nervous breakdown. Kelly launched her fighter straight into the thickest part of the asteroid field, moving at speeds that Veltar's instruments couldn't properly track. The human pilot twisted and rolled through gaps that seemed impossibly small, her ship dancing between chunks of rock that were spinning and colliding with each other in completely unpredictable patterns. But here's the thing that really got to Veltar. Kelly wasn't just surviving this death trap. She was making it look easy. The human pilot anticipated where each asteroid would be before it got there, threading her ship through spaces that closed behind her within seconds. How is she doing that? Kixtal whispered, pressing his face against the viewport. Morrison, who was calmly monitoring from their bridge, glanced over. Kelly grew up racing atmospheric fighters through mountain canyons during thunderstorms. This is actually pretty calm weather for her. Calm weather. Veltar watched another chunk of rock the size of a building tumble past Kelly's fighter, missing by what looked like inches, and Morrison called it calm weather. The evacuation itself was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance performed by lunatics. One by one, the human fighters would streak into the asteroid field, dock with a research vessel just long enough to load passengers or cargo, and then rocket back out through chaos. Each trip took less than 15 minutes. Each trip looked like certain death to anyone watching. But the most unnerving part was listening to the human pilots chatter over the radio. They weren't grimly focused on survival like any rational species would be. They were having fun. Nice dodge on that spinner, Rodriguez. Thanks, Kelly. Did you see Thompson thread that needle back there? Showing off again, Thompson. Hey, if you got it, use it. They were treating the most dangerous rescue operation Veltar had ever witnessed like it was some kind of sport. And somehow, impossibly, it was working. For hours. That's all it took for the humans to completely turn around what should have been a disaster that killed everyone involved. For hours to evacuate 12 Zephyrian crew members and dozens of precious genetic samples from a ship that was slowly being torn apart by an asteroid field that their own computers said was impossible to navigate. But here's the thing that really messed with Veltar's head. The humans acted like they just finished a routine training exercise. When Kelly docked her fighter with the Relentless after the final run, carrying the last batch of genetic samples, she hopped out of her cockpit and immediately started joking with the other pilots about who had pulled off the smoothest maneuvers. Rodriguez was complaining that Thompson had shown off too much during the third run, while Thompson was insisting that style points absolutely counted in rescue operations. Meanwhile, Veltar was sitting in the human medical bay, trying to process what she'd just witnessed. The medical bay itself was another shock to her system. Where Zephyrian medical facilities were sterile, quiet places with soft lighting and gentle music, this human space was bright, efficient, and somehow felt alive with energy. And she was breathing their air. Unfiltered, unprocessed air that would have been toxic to most species she knew. The humans had explained that their ship's atmosphere was basically identical to their homeworld, which meant she was breathing the air of a death world and somehow not dying from it. The human medic, a cheerful woman named Dr. Lisa Chun, had checked her over and declared her remarkably adaptable for someone from a Class I world. Veltar wasn't sure if that was a compliment or just an observation, but Dr. Chun had said it with the same casual tone someone might use to comment on the weather. Through the medical bay's viewport, Veltar watched the most incredible thing she'd ever seen. The humans were clearing a path through the asteroid field using controlled explosives. Not carefully, methodically clearing it like any civilized species would do, but literally blowing chunks of rock out of their way with the kind of casual efficiency that suggested they'd done this 1,000 times before. Commander Morrison had stopped by to check on her, and that's when Veltar finally asked a question that had been burning in her mind since the rescue started. "Commander," she said, "how did you make that look so easy? My people trained for years just to pilot ships through normal space. Your pilots just flew through an active collision zone like they were taking a leisurely cruise." Morrison leaned against a medical bay wall and gave her that unsettling human smile again. "You have to understand something about humans, Captain. We come from a world that's been trying to kill us since the day we evolved." He gestured toward the viewport, where his crew was still casually demolishing asteroids. "Earth isn't like your home world. Our gravity is strong enough to crush most species flat. Our weather patterns can level entire cities in a matter of hours. Our oceans are filled with predators that could swallow your entire ship. Even our plants are dangerous. Some of them will kill you just for touching them. Veltar listened, fascinated and horrified at the same time. So we adapted, Morrison continued. We developed reflexes that can respond in milliseconds. We learned to make life or death decisions while running at full speed. We evolved the ability to function under pressure that would paralyze most intelligent species. What you just saw, flying through an asteroid field, making split-second course corrections, trusting our instincts over our instruments, that's just how we've always lived. He shrugged, like he was discussing something as mundane as what to have for lunch. Split-second decisions, crushing atmospheric pressure, competing with predators that would scare half the galaxy. This was just a rescue operation in an asteroid field, pretty much a regular Tuesday for us. A regular Tuesday. Veltar would remember those words for the rest of her life. The journey back to Zephyrian space took 2 weeks, and Veltar spent most of that time observing humans and their ship. What she learned changed her entire understanding of what intelligent life could be. These weren't just another spacefaring species. They were survivors who had turned survival into an art form. She watched them exercise in gravitational fields that would have crushed her bones. She saw them solve complex engineering problems by hitting things with tools until they worked. She witnessed them turn routine maintenance into competitive games where they raced to see who could complete tasks faster. And through it all, they maintained that same casual confidence that had marked their rescue operation. Danger wasn't something that paralyzed them or required careful committee discussions. Danger was just another problem to solve, preferably quickly and with a minimum of fuss. When they finally reached Zephyrian space and transferred Veltar and her crew to a rescue vessel from their own fleet, she found herself almost sad to leave the human ship. These terrifying Deathworlders had shown her what was possible when intelligence evolved alongside constant danger. The genetic samples were successfully delivered, and 3 species were saved from extinction. But Veltar's report about the rescue created waves throughout Zephyrian society and beyond. Word spread quickly through the galactic community about these new humans and their casual approach to situations that would terrify most civilized species. That's why, if you travel through certain sectors of space today, you'll find warning beacons with a simple message: Deathworlder territory, proceed with respect. Not because humans are aggressive or hostile, but because they redefine what's possible when survival becomes a way of life. And somewhere out there, the crew of the Relentless is probably turning someone else's impossible situation into just another Tuesday.